Welcome back, everyone. Aish, today I feel very sad for the Lungu family. Because what just happened is not just politics, it's humiliation. The South African government has finally said it clear. Edgar Lungu must be buried in Zambia, not here. They say the family must honor the court ruling. Before I continue, please click that like button and subscribe. And please watch till the end, because this story is going to make you angry, whether you are Zambian or South African. Now, before we dive deeper, let's play this short clip from Minister Lamola himself. Now let's talk about what he just...
We have noted the court outcome with regards to the reparations of the remains of the former Zambian President Edgar Lungu, the onset on the matter, we are hopeful that this ruling can signal some finality, that he will be buried back in Zambia, in his home, and that the Zambian government and the family of former President Lungu will find each other on the procession and all the processes. So it has always been our message to both parties, to the family and to the Zambian government.
Said. Listen carefully what the man basically said. Yes, the court has ruled, and we as South Africa support that Edgar Lungu's remains should go back to Zambia. He tried to make it sound diplomatic, like South Africa has always wanted an amicable solution, like they were just encouraging dialogue between the family and the Zambian government. But let's be honest, that was politics. What Lamola said in polite English is actually this: we don't want him here. Take him home. Let Zambia deal with him. That's the truth, plain and simple. You see, politicians love soft words. They say amicable solution, dialogue, procession of burial. But what's the real message? The real message is, he doesn't belong here. South Africa doesn't want to bury him here. And for the family of a man who once ruled a whole country, who once commanded respect, who once sat in the highest office of Zambia, this is humiliation. Let's not sugarcoat it. This is not just a burial matter. This is a rejection in death. Now think about this. Edgar Lungu was once president. He had power. He had influence. People bowed when he walked into a room. He had guards, convoys, ministers at his side. But today, his family is standing at the mercy of another country's court, waiting to be told, where can this man be buried? Imagine that. From the State House to being treated like excess luggage, from signing laws to begging for burial space. And Lamola, did you hear how he said it? He said he hopes the ruling brings finality. He hopes the family and the Zambian government will now find each other. That's political code for sort yourselves out. Don't dump this problem on South Africa. Now let's go back to those screenshots you saw earlier. Did you see how the Progressive Forces account said they would even escort the coffin to Lanseria Airport? Think about that. Escort, what does that mean? It means they are basically saying, we will watch with our own eyes to make sure this body leaves South African soil. That is not respect. That is humiliation. That is the treatment you give to a criminal being deported, not to a former head of state. And then look at the replies. One person asked, why is it difficult for him to be buried in his own country? Another one said the South African leadership should have made it clear from the start, because Lungu was not a South African citizen. Do you see the tone there? People are angry. People are saying, why are we even wasting time with this? He's Zambian. Send him home. Finish. So now let me provoke both sides, because this is where it gets interesting. Zambia, where were you? Why did your former president's family have to even consider South Africa? Why did this issue drag to the courts of another country? Why was your leader's coffin sitting in foreign soil like an unwanted guest? That's shameful. You can't blame South Africa for everything. Sometimes you must look at yourself. And South Africa, don't clap yet. Because your handling of this is also humiliating. You acted like you were protecting your land from an intruder. But remember, this is not some random person. This is a former president of a neighboring country. A man who signed deals with you. A man who called himself your ally. You could have shown respect, at least diplomatically. But no, you made it public, you made it political, and you made sure the world saw that you don't want him here. So both sides come out looking bad. Zambia looks weak, and South Africa looks cruel. And the family? They are the ones humiliated in the middle. Now let me ask you this, and I want you to debate in the comments. Should a leader always be buried in their homeland? Should a man like Edgar Lungu, with all his controversies, still be given the dignity of choosing his resting place? Or is it fair that South Africa rejected him like this? Because right now, what we are watching is not just a funeral story. It's a story of power, pride, humiliation, and rejection. And it shows us how fragile respect is. One day you are a president, the next day you are a coffin nobody wants. Now let's slow down and go line by line with what Lamola said. Because in politics, the devil is always in the words. He said, "We continue to encourage both the Zambian government and the family to be involved in dialogue, to reach an amicable solution." What does that mean? It means, this is not our problem. Don't involve us. Go sort yourselves out. South Africa is basically washing its hands clean. Then he said, "We are hopeful that this ruling will bring finality, that he will be buried back in Zambia, in his home." You hear that? He didn't say, "We welcome him here." He didn't say, "We respect his family's wishes." He didn't even say, "South Africa will assist." No. He said, "Back in Zambia, his home." That is a diplomatic way of saying, take him and go. Now let's pause here. Imagine you are Lungu's daughter, his wife, his family. Imagine hearing a government official of another country standing on TV, smiling, saying politely that they are happy your father is leaving, happy his coffin is being shipped out. That is humiliation of the highest order. And here's the funny part. South Africa acted like it was protecting something. Protecting their soil, protecting their law. But the reality, they were protecting their pride. Because if Lungu was buried here, people would have asked, why is Zambia not honouring its own president? Why is South Africa carrying Zambia's shame? So South Africa turned the coffin into a political football. Kick it back to Zambia. Done. Now, let's ask the hard question. Why was this even an issue? Why was the coffin here in the first place? Did the Lungu family think South Africa would give him more dignity than Zambia? That's the real shame for Zambia. Because if your own president's family thought he would be treated better in foreign soil, then it says a lot about the fractures inside Zambia itself. Let's not forget, Edgar Lungu was controversial. Many Zambians were divided about his legacy. Some called him a man of faith. Others called him corrupt, weak, and a disaster for the economy. So maybe his family thought South Africa would be a neutral ground, a place without politics. But what did they find? They found humiliation instead. And this is where both countries must feel the sting. South Africa, you had a chance to show respect, to rise above, to be diplomatic. But you chose rejection. You chose to embarrass the family in public. You made it look like you were deporting a body, not handling a funeral. That's cruel. Zambia, you had a chance to honor your own, to settle this quietly, to prove you still care for your former leaders even when they fall from grace. But you dragged your feet. You let another nation's courts decide the dignity of your own former president. That's weakness. And here's the part nobody wants to say out loud. This whole issue is not about burial. It's about power. It's about pride. It's about countries flexing their authority even over the dead. South Africa wanted to show it cannot be disrespected. Zambia wanted to show it still controls its leaders, even after they die. And in the middle, a coffin. A coffin treated like a political hot potato. A coffin that is escorted to the airport, not with honor, but with suspicion. A coffin that is told, you don't belong here. Go back where you came from. Let me ask you again. Where is the dignity? Where is the respect? Where is the humanity? And let me provoke you further. If this was Nelson Mandela in Zambia, do you think Zambia would have told South Africa to take him back? Never. Mandela would have been honored. His coffin would have been received with tears and pride. But Edgar Lungu, he was treated like excess baggage. So, my brothers and sisters watching this video, be honest with yourselves. This was not just a ruling. This was humiliation, public and loud. And I want you to comment right now. Who do you think humiliated the Lungu family more? Was it South Africa for rejecting the burial? Or was it Zambia for failing to claim their own leader before the world laughed? Because in my eyes, both countries have blood on their hands. And the Lungu family, they are carrying the shame. Now let's talk about those screenshots. Because social media always tells the real story. Not the polished government lines, not the diplomatic speeches, but the raw voice of the people. Look at that first post from the progressive forces. They said, "We will escort the coffin to Lanseria Airport to make sure it leaves South African soil." Read that again slowly. Escort, to make sure. That is not respect. That is not honor. That is surveillance. That is basically saying, we don't trust you. We don't want you here. We will watch with our own eyes until your body is gone. That's not how you treat a president's coffin. That's how you treat a deportee. That's how you treat illegal goods. Imagine the coffin of a man who once ruled Zambia, being talked about like cargo that must be escorted out of the country. That is humiliation, pure and simple. And here's the sting for South Africa. When you allow groups like that to speak so boldly, it shows you don't even hide your rejection anymore. You don't even pretend to honor a former African leader. You basically say, we will watch his coffin like we are watching a criminal. And you think that makes you strong? No, it makes you look heartless. Now look at the replies under that post. One person asked, why is it difficult for him to be buried in his own country? That's a sharp question. That's not aimed at South Africa, that's aimed at Zambia. Why indeed? Why is Zambia so divided, so broken, that even its own former president cannot find peace in Zambian soil without drama? That is national shame. That is a wound exposed to the world. And another person said, South Africa should have made it clear from the start because Lungu was not a South African citizen. That one is brutal because it cuts both ways. It says, why did we even waste time with this coffin? And at the same time it says, Zambia, stop embarrassing yourself. Claim your own dead. But here's the thing. Both of those replies are cold. They are not mourning. They are not respectful. They are treating Lungu like a problem, like a nuisance, like an embarrassment to be solved. And that, my friends, is the real humiliation. When the public speaks of you, not with respect, not with sadness, but with irritation, that's when you know your legacy has collapsed. Zambians watching this, why did you allow your former president to be reduced to this? Why did you let the world see that your leader is unwanted? Where is your pride as a nation? Where is your dignity? South Africans watching this, why are you celebrating his rejection like a victory? Do you not see the shame in kicking out a coffin? Do you not see that you have reduced your country to the role of a customs officer for the dead? Because let me tell you, This is not strength. This is weakness disguised as pride. And it shows us how broken African politics really is. We honor leaders while they are alive because of their power. But once the power is gone, we spit them out like rotten fruit. And that's exactly what happened to Lungu. The court ruling was just the official stamp. But the social media reaction, that was the real burial. He was buried in humiliation before he was even lowered into the ground. And that's why I said from the start, this is not just a burial. This is a rejection, a humiliation, and a lesson. Now I want to hear from you in the comments. If you were Lungu's family, would you feel more insulted by South Africa's cold rejection or by Zambia's silence and hesitation? Who disrespected him more? Because one thing is clear, no matter how you spin it, the screenshots prove it. This man's final chapter is not about honor. It's about humiliation. Let's call this what it really is, coffin diplomacy. Because this whole drama is not about respect. It's about politics played with a coffin. A coffin being pushed between two countries like a football. A coffin being used to show power. Think about it. If this was Nelson Mandela's coffin in Zambia, do you think Zambia would have treated it like this? Never. Mandela's coffin would have been received like gold. People would have filled the streets. His burial would have been a moment of honor. But Edgar Lungu, his coffin is being spoken of like contraband. Escorted, inspected, rejected. Now let's look at other African leaders. Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe. Even he, controversial as he was honored in his own country. Yes, there was drama. Yes, people fought about where to bury him, but it was Zimbabweans fighting over their own. They didn't leave it to another country's court. They didn't allow his coffin to be treated like luggage. I told you, the Lungu family isn't just a silent victim, they are the ones fueling this chaos. And now the court has officially ordered them, forcing the spotlight on their stubborn stand. Let me hit you with the headlines. On 8th August 2025, the Pretoria High Court ruled that even against his family's wishes, Edgar Lungu's remains must be repatriated to Zambia for a state funeral. The court said that public interest in honoring a former president overrides personal preference. Now imagine how humiliating that is. A family fighting for their father's coffin to stay in South Africa, and a court in another country telling them, no, take him home. Whether you like it or not, Zambia must bury him. That's a slap in the face. And here's the shocking part. It wasn't South Africa who wanted him to stay. It wasn't Zambia who begged for him to be buried here. It was his own family. They refused to let him be buried in Zambia. They demanded a private burial in South Africa. Why? Because they wanted to keep President Hichilema, Lungu's political rival, away. They didn't want him to have the final say. They didn't want Hichilema to stand at the funeral and pretend to honor the man he fought so bitterly in politics. So think about that for a second. A whole president, a man who once led a nation, turned into a pawn in a family feud. His coffin, instead of being a symbol of dignity, became a bargaining chip in a fight between relatives and politicians. That is humiliation. From the start, there was already a plan. Zambia had agreed to bring him back. There was supposed to be a state funeral. He would lie in state. The public would view his body. There would be military honors. And finally, he would be buried at Embassy Park, the presidential memorial site, where other Zambian leaders are laid to rest. That was the plan. That was the honor. But the family said no. They blocked it. They pulled the coffin back. They refused the repatriation. They brought the whole process to a stop. And because of that, President Hichilema even ended the national mourning period early. Imagine that, a whole country forced to stop mourning because the family decided they wanted something else. Do you see the disgrace? The family embarrassed not just themselves, but the whole nation. They rejected a state funeral. They rejected a national honor. They rejected the people's right to say goodbye, all because of personal grudges. And what happened after that? South Africa's courts had to step in. Judges, lawyers, politicians, all dragged into a fight over a coffin held like a hostage, a coffin debated like evidence in a trial. And finally the court said, "Enough, send him home." That's why I say it was not South Africa that humiliated him. It was not even Zambia. It was his own family, because they showed the whole world that they did not trust his home country to give him dignity. They made him look like an exile even in death. And let's be real, when your own blood refuses to bury you in your homeland, when your own family rejects the state's honor, that is the ultimate humiliation. That is not love. That is betrayal. So now I ask you, and I want you to go wild in the comments, who disrespected Edgar Lungu more? Was it South Africa, who rejected him from their soil? Or was it his own family, who dragged his coffin into a legal circus because of their pride and grudges? Because in my eyes, the family's refusal is the deepest insult of all. They denied him peace. They denied him dignity. They denied Zambia the right to close the chapter properly. They turned him from a president into a problem, from a leader into luggage. And that, my friends, is the biggest disgrace of all. Let me not sugarcoat it. Edgar Lungu's coffin was not treated like the body of a president. It was treated like a hostage. A coffin held ransom, not by enemies, not by foreign powers, but by his own family. Think about it. Instead of being carried with pride into Zambia, his coffin sat stuck in South Africa like luggage waiting for clearance. Instead of being honored by the people he once ruled, his coffin was dragged into a courtroom. Lawyers, judges, politicians, all arguing over a dead man like they were arguing over property. That is not dignity. That is humiliation. From president to prisoner, from state house to courthouse, from signing bills to being escorted to the airport like a deportee. That's the journey of Edgar Lungu. And the family, the family. They were not guardians of his legacy. They were gatekeepers of disgrace. They didn't dig a grave, they dug shame. They didn't fight for honor. They fought to embarrass the nation. Instead of closing the chapter with respect, they stretched it, they twisted it, they poisoned it. You know what it looked like? It looked like the family was saying, "We don't want him buried in Zambia because we don't trust Zambia. We don't trust the government. We don't trust the people." And in doing so, they made him look like a man rejected by his own land. That is the ultimate betrayal. And South Africa? They didn't want to be dragged into this mess. They looked at the coffin and said, "No, this is not ours. Take it back. Put it where it belongs." They said it politely through Lamola. They said it legally through the court. But the real message was loud. He is not welcome here. So ask yourself this: who gave Edgar Lungu a bigger insult? Was it South Africa, who rejected him like a parcel marked "Return to Sender"? Or was it his own family, who refused his soil, refused his people, refused his resting place? So now I ask you, everyone watching, if this was your father, your leader, your president, would you allow his coffin to be dragged like this? Would you allow lawyers and courts to decide where he rests? Or would you honor him at home, no matter what? Because what we saw here is not African pride, it is African shame. And the Lungu family, they carry the heaviest part of that shame. Let's step back for a moment and look at the bigger picture. This wasn't just a family fight. This wasn't just a court ruling. This was a whole continent watching Zambia and South Africa embarrass themselves on the global stage. Start with Zambia. A nation that once gave us Kenneth Kaunda, a founding father of independence. A nation that always claimed dignity and peace. But what did the world see this time? The coffin of a former president being rejected, delayed, argued over like a political scandal. Instead of headlines about respect, the headlines read, "Court orders repatriation of Lungu's body." Imagine that, a whole country needing a foreign judge to tell them where their leader should be buried. That is not pride, that is shame. And then there's South Africa. South Africa loves to act like the big brother of the region, the powerhouse of Southern Africa. But how did they look in this drama? Cold, arrogant, heartless. Instead of showing diplomacy, they showed rejection. Instead of carrying the coffin with quiet respect until Zambia sorted itself out, they went public, they went legal, they made it loud. They looked like they were throwing out trash. Now think about the ordinary people. Ordinary Zambians sitting at home, mourning, confused. Their government says one thing, their president says another. The family blocks everything. And then South Africa's court steps in, ordering repatriation. How do they feel? They feel insulted. They feel like their own country was powerless. They feel like the dignity of their nation was taken away. And ordinary South Africans, they're angry too. They're asking, why is our country wasting time in court over a foreign president's coffin? Why is his family dragging their drama into our soil? They feel used. They feel disrespected. They feel like their land is being treated as a dumping ground for Zambia's problems. That's the real tragedy. Ordinary people on both sides were disrespected. Zambians were robbed of closure, robbed of the chance to bury their leader with dignity. South Africans were dragged into a family feud they never asked for. And both came out angry, bitter, and humiliated. So who wins here? Nobody. Not Zambia, not South Africa, not the Lungu family, and certainly not Edgar Lungu himself. His legacy is now tied to this circus, this courtroom drama, this humiliation. And let me tell you, the world is laughing. Other countries are looking at Africa and shaking their heads. They're saying, "Say, look at them. They can't even bury their leaders without a fight. They can't even honor their dead without politics." That is the picture we painted. That is the shame we showed. So I'll ask you again, who do you think looked worse in all of this? Zambia, powerless to control their own burial? South Africa, arrogant in rejecting the coffin? Or the family, stubborn and selfish, dragging the coffin into humiliation? Because at the end of the day, all three are guilty. And the ordinary people, the ones who had no voice in this, they are the ones left angry and humiliated. Thank you for watching.